Seals, Ontario. So welcome to the 2 new members. Happy to have you joining us. I would also like to acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on the unceded Algonquin homelands, and I would like to acknowledge and thank the Algonquin Nation for their stewardship of these lands since time immemorial. Given that both the chair and vice chair are unable to be in the meeting in person this evening, we will need to select a voting member to chair tonight's meeting. Are there any suggestions or volunteers for chair? Anthony, well done. Thank you, sir.
I was going to say it was excellent last time.
All right, so I'm going to call a 5-minute recess to review the agenda with Anthony this evening, and we'll be back in a few minutes. Thanks, everyone.
Recording stopped. Anything I'll be here all day, and there's every week you can't stretch it.
Take a close-up photo of the screen with all the names. Text or Facebook? Either anything is fine. Facebook is fine.
Try sending it to you, this one too? Let's see what happens. Let's see if it happens.
Yeah, yeah, right? Especially around the table.
Should come even about 30 seconds.
Yes. It's a little bit more elbow room.
2 if they have suspension, so 11 days of discretion last year. Lost price. And it's not, that's not. But like, you only put it in, try it out, it's similar, trying it out. And it was, the reason wasn't wrong, it wasn't the most appropriate.
Yeah, that's right. Recording in progress.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to now call, I now call for a mover to approve the agenda. Does any, Jess Whitley, does anyone have any changes or additions to the agenda? All right. As Sue is unable to join us this evening, I suggest deferring the items 7.2 and 7.3 to the next SEAC meeting. All those in favor of approving the agenda as amended or opposed? All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Carried. Moving on to item 4, delegations. We have no delegations tonight. Moving on to item 5, review of the Special Education Advisory Committee minutes. I now call for a mover to approve the minutes of the January 7th, 2026 meeting. Lindsay Copeland. That the minutes from the January 7th, 2026 SEAC meeting be approved. This motion is debatable, but is restricted to amendments, and amendments are restricted to the accuracy of the minutes. This motion is approved by the majority of the votes cast. All those in favor are opposed?
Sorry,
those-
in favor or,
Are those in favor?
so the minutes are unchanged from what we saw from last time, right? They're not going to change. They're the same.
So if there are amendments to those minutes,
Right.
they're welcomed, but we don't have any amendments at this time
Yeah.
to add. So I think that would be a good idea if the committee had amendments to make so that we can move
it
forward.
off the agenda.
But I don't know what amendments we can add at this
Yeah.
point.
All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 6 carried. So, approved. And then, so, at the SEAC meeting on April 7th, 2026, an amendment was added to the March 4th minutes. However, the minutes were not approved as amended and are still pending. Anthony moved to approve the minutes on the March 4th, 2026 meeting. That the minutes from the March 4th, 2026 meeting be approved as amended. This motion is debatable, but is restricted to amendments, and the amendments are restricted to the accuracy of the minutes. This motion is approved by the majority of the votes cast. I do propose an amendment
To March's,
to March 4th, yes.
An additional amendment?
Yes.
Okay.
Where the delegation from Eric Bertram, what was already in the minutes to add between parentheses, he also recommended that the board systematically collect data regarding families seeking specialized program class placements, comma, including cases where families do not proceed to the formal application stage, comma, to better understand unmet demand and barriers within the process, period, closing parentheses. And that's from the transcript that I reviewed carefully. Those, I guess, those in favor of the amendment?
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, carried.
So those minutes will come back with that amendment again.
For the next meeting. Yes, Lindsay?
With the
Yep,
additional
the
amendment?
amendment has been approved, so the full minutes can come back now for a vote.
Yeah, but they'll come back.
They can,
Or right now, or next meeting.
they can come back next meeting, or they can be voted on.
So with that amendment, they can be voted on. Great.
Yes, Lindsay?
Just a quick question on procedure. I note that the amendment that I proposed at the last meeting appears in the April minutes. Great. I don't believe I see it in the copy of the March minutes in the package. So I just want to know what the process is. Is it that it's noted in the April minutes and that's it? That's what's supposed to happen? Okay.
I can speak to that. Last meeting was voted on and carried.
Yeah.
But the actual minutes as amended weren't voted on, so that's what we've done just now.
Okay.
If we vote on the amended minutes now, then we'll create a revised version that will be uploaded to the archives.
Okay, so I don't see an amended version now, but that's okay, it's in the okay, that's all I wanna know, thank you.
So we're gonna vote on the amended March with your amendment. We're gonna vote on those minutes right now.
All right. We'll vote on that, both, with the amendments both together. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, carried. I now call upon I now call for a mover to approve the minutes of the April 7th, 2026 meeting, that the minutes from the April 7th, 2026 meeting be approved. I call for a mover. Sonia. And that the minutes from the April 27th, 2026 SEAC meeting be approved. This motion is debatable, but is restricted to the amendments, and amendments are restricted to the accuracy of the minutes. This motion is approved by the majority of votes cast. Any amendments or anything? All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Carried. Moving on to item 6, presentations. I now call upon Superintendent Laverne, the Superintendent of Program Services, to provide a presentation regarding the Board Priority Learning Plan. The presentation will be about 15 minutes, with 30 minutes allotted for questions and discussion following the presentation.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I think the yes, perfect. It's about to appear on the screen. If forgive me as I reference some of my notes, I'm starting to realize that my eyes are failing at a faster and faster rate, regardless of what I put on my face for them. So some of this font is, wow.
Yep.
We appreciate the opportunity to be with you this evening. I'm joined by Dr. Kat Magner, who is our General Manager of Program Services. What we're hoping to share, we can actually move to the next slide. What we're hoping to share tonight, and Emily is going to jump in at various points as well, is to review the Student Achievement Plan and the district's Board Priority Learning Plan, to have a discussion about some of the targets and sample actions that we have in place this year, review some of the data, recognizing that the data is not complete yet. We're not through this cycle. So this is the most recent data that we have to reference to share with you this evening. And then to hear from you regarding any ideas you might have for us to explore in regards to actions or specific targets that you would like us to consider. We're at the time of year where we're starting to look at what our Board Priority Learning Plan will be for next year. And so your feedback would be really welcome in that. So on the next slide, you'll see a sample, and you can see what I'm talking about in terms of font size. That is the ministry's SEAC, or Student Achievement Plan. 3 years ago, the ministry mandated that all districts in the province implement the Student Achievement Action Plan. The template that they provided identifies some clear goals and some general indicators that we become more precise on at the district level. So you can see in the pink area, we're looking at core learning areas, specifically literacy and math. The blue area is where we look at pathways, preparedness, and graduation rates for students. And the green area speaks to student engagement and well-being. So we take that structure that the ministry provided to us, and as you'll see on the next slide, we enhance it. And the font doesn't get any better on the next slide, I promise. So what we've done to take that, we follow the exact same structure and the same pillars that the ministry has provided. We use that to target to identify the specific targets that we're going to aim for. So on the ministry SAP, it speaks, for example, in the pink area to EQAO, and that we have to establish increases in our EQAO results. And so we do a data analysis with our friends in Reed, helping us provide some of this data as well. We look at what our achievement, our most recent achievement was, and then what is an ambitious and realistic target for our next year. So what improvement are we seeking in each area? You'll also see, if you can read that, that we do identify some student groups in this area as well, and that is data informed. So we identify in a given area the student group with the greatest achievement gap or other relevant data gaps. So you'll see some of those, the groups of students changing as you look at that information. It's because as we took a look at the individual grade levels or the specific learning priority, the group of students in greatest need changed. And so we made sure that we were focusing in that. Something that we do that we don't have to do, but we thought it was a good idea to do, and you can see this in the far right column, is list some examples of the initiatives that we are taking within the year. That is not a complete list by any stretch, but it does give us some. It gives us a way of sharing with everybody different actions and initiatives that we're taking to realize the changes that we wish to see in that second column. So, for example, in the literacy and math, so the pink area, from a target perspective, we targeted reading intervention teachers to support kindergarten this year because we saw that our literacy needs were greatest in the kindergarten area, and we knew that if we focused support there, that would create a solid foundation for the students' literacy development moving forward. We piloted a grade 9 math assessment tool that was built in-house to help us identify more strategically what the students' learning needs were so that we could target those at a faster rate. We're also working to connect learning need with learning strategies and monitor impact on a tighter cycle so that we can identify what's working and what's not and make changes at a faster rate. In the pathways area, we are expanding student voice and have been expanding student voice initiatives to better understand their experiences and connect their learning to their goals and goals. We're expanding partnerships with various community members and organizations, and we're monitoring credit accumulation between grade 10 and grade 11, specifically in math and science, to see what's happening, which students are taking which courses, and what their success rate is. And under engagement and well-being, we are rolling out a district-wide attendance strategy. We're assessing our re-engagement programs for effectiveness, and deepening the mental health literacy work through the ministry modules that have been provided. The next slide shows something that we actually went into a far greater focus on this year, and that was identifying specific targets, and I referred to those a little bit earlier. The ministry indicates that we need to see a percentage increase in given EQAO assessments, for example. So last year, we took a look at our achievement results to date, and then did an analysis, had conversations with many people, including senior staff. Reed, again, was very helpful in providing us with trend data, trend analysis over a series of years, to identify what our targets were going to be. And so you can see there that we have indicated reasonable and ambitious targets in our different areas. So you can see, for example, grade 3, we're seeking a 3% increase in reading, grade 6 a 5% increase in writing, and grade 9 a 3% increase in math. We wanted to make sure that our targets did move us in the right direction, but they were attainable as well. And the data we have to date indicates that we're well on track to achieving and or exceeding those targets as we go through. In pathways, we were seeking a 2% increase in multilingual learner engagement in experiential learning experiences, and a 2% increase in student belief in their preparedness. We've seen a general increase in that in the last couple of years, and we wanted to make sure that continued. From an engagement and well-being perspective, we were looking for a 4% increase in attendance for students in grades 1 to 8, and that's actually a 90% attendance rate would meet that qualification. And a decrease in the number of discretionary suspensions for students in grades 4 to 12. Our targets are built on the most recent data that we have at that time. So from an EQAO perspective, at that point we had the the EQAO results from the 23-24 school year. We used that to analyze not only the data we got from the 24-25 school year, but also where we're headed for the 25-26 school year. We can't wait. The timelines that the data comes out to us means that we really can't wait to set our new targets until that comes out. For example, this year the EQAO data came out in late November or early December. Had we waited to set targets in December, we would have only had about 4 months before coming back to talk to you, which doesn't give us enough time to really change the supports or the interventions that we're providing for students. So there's always a slight misalignment, but ultimately it's an ongoing journey, and these data points we analyze for a trend over a period of time. The next slide provides 2 pivotal frameworks that we use in our district. One is the student achievement and well-being learning cycle. To simplify, learning is complex. What's happening in classrooms is complex. The needs of students is very complex. But to try to simplify that work as much as we can, we developed this cycle within the OCDSD that focuses on identifying a learning need, identifying the action to go with that learning need, and then monitoring for the impact. So the questions that we ask, and this is just embedded within our narrative in the district, is what's their learning need and how do we know? What are we doing about it? And how do we know whether it made a difference? That last piece is really, really important. It's generally, when you look at education in general historically, identifying the learning need has been there. Identifying strategies or actions to engage with has been there. Checking to see whether that action actually made the intended difference in education in general, beyond the OCDSB, has never been as strong. We're certainly working very quickly to strengthen that and have embedded a number of strategies to make sure that we are following up on the monitoring piece as well. Emily, did you want to speak to the other framework?
Yeah, so you'll see on the right-hand side, that is our mental health and well-being strategy. And so certainly when it comes to our work in supporting student well-being, that really kind of grounds our work. So it really is based in those 3 pillars of building and belonging, building, and bridging. So that's really that kind of tiered intervention for student support. And then outlines the priorities that we really want to focus on. So things like student voice and agency, similar to what Superintendent Laverne was speaking to, partnering with community and families, mental health literacy, stigma reduction. Those 6 priority areas really help us to define what are our steps going to be as we move forward with this work.
And just to jump off what Emily was just saying there, the work between program and LSS has just gotten stronger over the last few years as we've worked to identify where there are intersections to our work and how we can work together to strengthen staff capacity in providing support and improve the student achievement and well-being. So it's a very powerful connection. Our next slide just identifies a few of the actions that were provided earlier on the slide. I just tried to pull a couple of them out so that you can see them a little bit higher level and maybe be able to read the font. You know, in the area of literacy and math, we are engaging in far more data-driven approaches and a strategic focus on specific instructional strategies. In pathways, expanding, as I said earlier, community partnerships and expanding our STEM focus. And in the area of engagement and well-being, formalizing our attendance support and ongoing monitoring of belonging. And I would actually suggest that ongoing monitoring is a theme that flows through everything we're doing right now. We're really trying to increase the amount of monitoring we're doing so we can identify how students are progressing. And if that progression is not happening as we might like, what can we do about it earlier? I get to breathe now. And we're going to head to the next slide and start to have a conversation about some data.
So we wanted to bring forward some of the data or evidence of impact on the board priority during the plan so far this year. So as Dr. Lebrun indicated, some of the measures that we use, such as EQAO, we only get that data once a year. So the information that we're sharing this evening on EQAO is based on 23-24, but we have a current cohort of students writing an elementary as we speak and soon in secondary, and we'll be able to further see how our actions so far this year have moved things forward. So in terms of literacy, we have seen a notable increase in elementary literacy. In grade 3, we saw increases of 2% for reading and writing. So when it says narrowing the gap there, as Dr. Lebrun mentioned, we set those targets, the 3% and the 4% targets are our targets that we set internally. So we're approaching the targets that we set based on the 23-24 data, which is showing that we're moving things in a good direction. When we look at grade 6, we've actually surpassed, or met or surpassed the targets that we've set. So that is also showing that we're moving in the right direction. We hope that the work, that very intentional work that we've been doing this year is continuing to, going to continue to demonstrate growth when we see the data. Grade 10, we didn't see year-over-year growth, but we are maintaining success. So we did set a 2% target, and we're hoping again that through the work that we've done this year, we'll actually see some growth next year. But all of this data, when we compare it to the province, we're very, very comparable to the province, usually within plus or minus 1 or 2%. So we're very, very on target with the rest of the province in terms of our achievement levels. When we look specifically at students with special education needs, you can see that there was growth, certainly at the elementary panel, growth that even surpassed the rest of the students in the district. So between 4 and 12% growth in reading and writing for grades 3 and 6. Grade 10, we didn't see any growth, but it's not uncommon when you look at the year-over-year trends for that grade 10 cohort to see slight fluctuations up and down around that portion of students being successful. So although the rates are slightly lower for this latest cohort, it's not something that's overly concerning when we look at the trends year over year. Moving to math on the next slide. Here we also saw some more moderate growth at elementary in grades 3 and grade 6. So moving again in that direction towards the targets we've set, so that is promising. Grade 9, we actually saw significant growth that again surpassed the target that we've set. So we've been doing a lot of really intentional focused work with our grade 9 cohorts this year, including giving them a lot more experience with the EQAO assessments and opportunities to practice and learn in their classrooms. So again, hoping to see us surpass that target even more by the end of this year. And those trends were similar for our students with special education needs, again, even more accelerated than the rest of our district. So that's showing that the gaps are closing for those students. When we look at, on the next slide, for pathways and preparedness, we had some specific targets for our grade 9 students. In terms of the credit accumulation, as Dr. Lebrun mentioned, one of the students where we saw the most significant gap in terms of credit accumulation was our students from low socioeconomic neighborhoods. So we haven't yet seen any growth. Our baseline data that we looked at from last year was that we had about 78% of students achieving their credit accumulation, but that's showing that things are steady. We're not seeing a decline, and that was just based on semester one. So as we continue to do our work for the remainder of the year, we're hoping to see some growth there. For our graduation rates, again, our Indigenous students showed the biggest gap. We have been doing some very intentional work this year through our Pathways teams to support our students, Indigenous students in their, with some individualized plans to help them move towards graduation. And that work is showing significant growth. So compared to our baseline, we see an increase of about 12% from our students last year, or the previous cohort that we had looked at in terms of their credit accumulation, which is indicating that they are on track to graduate. So that's a really, really positive indicator. For our experiential learning and our job skills programming, the students that were the most underrepresented in those programs were students who self-identify as Indigenous or are multilingual learners. And again, our data for progress so far this year is trending quite positively. We're seeing significant increases in the proportions of students from those two groups who are enrolling in programs like our SHISM, so that's our Specialist High Skills Major Program, our Dual Credit Program, and our S-Series program. So for those of you that aren't familiar with that, our S-Series program includes our School Within a College program, School Within a Trade, and School Within a Future Technologies program. So students are enrolling in these programs, and we're also seeing success. So of those students participating, 83% are reporting an increase in feeling prepared for their next step in learning or for what's coming after high school. And they're also achieving success through things like achieving their level 1 apprenticeship. And also their dual credit. So quite high success rates for those students who are in the program. And we're also seeing an increase in engagement in our experiential learning programs. So those are things like our partnerships with Carleton University and with the Aviation Museum. So all of these indicators are showing that we actually are moving towards the targets or even surpassing the targets that we set, so it's quite promising.
And Emily, the next slide is over to you.
Yeah, so when we look at mental health and well-being, thank you. So when we look at our attendance rates, we are seeing the highest rates in the last 3 years. And so again, our target was an increase of 4%, and in fact, we are actually up by 5% at this point, above the provincial average. When it comes to awareness of mental health supports, certainly our staff have been doing a lot of work in this area. So once again, we're seeing increases of 2%. And so certainly have made our target and hope to surpass that as we continue the work that we are doing with students and in particular student leaders in this work. When it comes to restorative practices, so that is one of the pieces of work that we are doing aimed at decreasing discretionary suspensions in our system. So we have been able to train over 400 staff this year in restorative practices. So this could be anything from a full 2-day training to coaching, implementation of circles in classrooms, staff presentations, etc. And so looking at that data, it was really interesting to read the feedback from educators, because what they continually told us is that they felt that they walked away from that training with ready-to-use strategies to implement in their schools and their classrooms right away with students. What we are seeing in terms of the data at this time is we have seen a decrease in discretionary suspensions for approximately 80%, by 80% of the target schools that we are doing that restorative practices training targeting. We also have done the Mental Health Champions Initiative. So again, this is very much about student leadership and agency. And so it is them leading the work of mental health promotion and awareness of mental health resources in schools. And so we've been able to expand that into all of our high schools this year, including our adult high school and our alternate sites. So certainly they have been busy this week in Mental Health Week, certainly running events all throughout schools in our district. And then the last piece that Superintendent Laverne had spoken to was the mental health literacy modules from the ministry. So this year we rolled that out in our grade 6 classrooms. So and now again that is being implemented in grade 6, 7, 8, and careers grade 10 course. And so we are working with our program evaluator to continue to draw feedback from both students and staff around how that implementation is going and how we can continue to support educators in this work moving forward. And so if you go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the next slide does speak specifically to special education students. So once again, when we look at the attendance rates, we are seeing an increase of 4% for students who are identified as having special education needs. While we certainly are seeing improvements, that continues to be discrepancies there, where the average attendance rate is still 10% lower. So that continues to be an area of focus for us. When it comes to awareness of mental health supports, once again, we've seen an increase of 2% for students with special education needs. However, once again, you will see that there are 4% fewer students identifying that knowledge of mental health services as compared to the overall population. So again, continues to be an area of focus of us as we move into our action plan for next year.
And the data is, so thank you both for that. The data is really key at this time of year as we take a look at where have we seen gains and how can we make sure those gains continue? Where did we possibly see things remain status, in which case, what can we do differently to move that forward? And where we see data slipping, then that becomes a more urgent priority for us to take a look at. So on the next slide, you'll see some possible next steps. And please know that these are some initial thinkings. They aren't the formal actions we're going to take yet. But our hope is to hear some thoughts from you tonight. So again, I apologize for the font size. But we have provided some initial next steps. And from a next step perspective, we're speaking of action. So for example, in the literacy and math area, we're looking at providing clear examples of strategically chosen high-impact instructional strategies. So what do I mean by that? We have been focusing on some key instructional strategies this year, and we see that being implemented across the district. But I would suggest that we're seeing pockets of excellence, not necessarily a cohesive approach to that. So our goal is to expand those pockets so that we see it happening in a more rigorous way in all of our classes in all of our schools. We're looking at expanding engagement with our 4 to 6 weeks learning cycles. Those cycles have actively used the student learning cycle I was speaking to you before. So it starts with what data is informing the student learning need, what instructional strategy are we attaching to that to support the student, and then regularly monitoring through that cycle so that we know that things are improving along the way. In the pathways area, we're going to continue to expand professional development on connecting experiential learning to curricular expectations. So we're very good at connecting in-class experiences to curricular expectations, but there's a lot of out-of-class experiences that also represent and demonstrate those experiences. So we're helping our educators build their confidence in their ability to do that as well. We're also doing credit audits and maximizing our use of the prior learning and recognition initiative that allows, this is a government policy that allows for us to capture evidence of learning outside of the classroom and attach that to curricular expectations, and in many cases grant credits because of those learning experiences beyond classroom. So it's a very powerful tool. And then finally, in the engagement and well-being area, continue focusing mental health literacy training with special education teachers and student success teachers specifically. They can be there in every school, so they can be champions to moving that work forward. And host student workshops on healthy device use. We know we all have the devices in front of us, and so the kids on a regular basis, how do we make sure that they are engaging that in a very healthy way? And so the last slide really just summarizes a couple of questions to begin the conversation, which are what strengths or areas of growth were evident? I apologize for my typo, I saw that about 2 minutes ago. What gaps exist, and what actions or next steps would you like to see implemented? And any other thoughts you have would be more than welcome. We're going to be jotting down notes as you're speaking so that we can embed your thinking into our planning for next year.
Questions? Lindsay?
Hi, thanks a lot. This was a
this is great. So you have a question about, what gaps, and I see a pretty big gap here in terms of our younger students. When you've got indicators for awareness of mental health resources, our younger students, they're not gonna, that's not gonna really work. We really need, for those resources to be brought to them. They're and to their families as well, I would say. I think that there's quite a huge knowledge gap in the parents, many times when we're dealing with special education students, there's a bit of trauma, not just with the students, but also with the families. So the effort to go seeking out resources is a bit more challenging. So for consideration, I think that might be a gap, particularly for younger students, that there might need to be a bit more of a proactive push for informing families about those resources. I think I'm going to keep going with gaps. I was reminded when the achievement cycle that you had put up when you had the two cycles. The one for the achievement cycle, the identify the learning need, identify the action, and monitor for impact. Certainly around this table, we've talked a lot about the lack of assessment capacity in the district. And so I think that identifying learning needs is a particular challenge. So I just want to flag that. And then speaking on behalf of my organization, representing kids who are deaf and hard of hearing, first of all, I think it's great that staff are being trained in restorative practices. I am a fan. One of the things, however, that has occurred to me, especially again with our younger students, is if there is a restorative justice process in place, if there's been some kind of altercation in the schoolyard, the children that I represent have a language delay. And in some of these situations, if you're bringing in, if it's a practice where you're bringing in everybody, you have to be cognizant of the fact that it's not just the people who, the kids who are the better talkers who are getting their story out first. There's a risk that might dominate the narrative. Hearing impaired, deaf children, potentially with a language delay, potentially requiring extra processing time. And I suspect that this is something that might also apply to some of our neurodiverse students as well, but it's definitely a hallmark for deaf and hard of hearing students. So the overall gap I see, and that and I think it just affects my group a little bit more, a little bit closer to home for us, is the younger students in all of this. Now, all that being said, there are some things that I think are really great. I think the emphasis on the ongoing monitoring of belonging is very important and key. I think there was something else that you have coming up for next year. Yeah, the mental health literacy training. Yes, excellent. And I would just hope that mental health literacy training also sort of has a consideration for the fact that when it comes to the special education students, again, you're dealing with parents who have a lot on their plate. So a soft sort of trauma-informed touch is probably warranted. Again, that's probably a little bit of a bias from my group. We have some of our kids who have progressive hearing loss, which is like a series of traumas that gets visited on the student and family. So that's all I have to offer to you. Thanks a lot. It was a great presentation.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, Lindsay, thanks so much for all of your comments,
Oh.
really. I did want to highlight because, when we present what some of our steps will be next year, it doesn't have all of the pieces. And
Of
actually
course.
what you highlighted is exactly what we have been talking about. And I presented to administrators this afternoon is how do we get to that elementary piece, how do we highlight that? And so certainly really a part of what we are integrating into next year's action plan is exactly that. So how are we doing kids have stress too? How are we doing some early intervention pieces? How are we putting mental health champions into elementary schools? How are we doing balanced device use, again, in elementary schools with student leaders there? So certainly a lot of the pieces, even the piece around parents. So we have been really thinking about how can we get information out to parents and families, caregivers. And so one of the things that we're looking at for next year is creating some short video clips. Because, you know, sitting through a speaker series sometimes might be challenging. So what are some of the really key pieces that parents want to learn about, and how can we kind of give some information in chunks that is accessible, trauma informed for everyone. So
as someone who's never made it to any of the speaker series despite my best intentions, I think that would be great.
amazing. Wow, that's great. So thank you for all your comments.
Hi.
Cindy Weaver?
Yeah. So thank you again for the wonderful presentation. And Lindsay, I just want to echo your comments. I also, and my group also feel them, especially when you get into the conditions that progress over time. The question I wanted to raise in particular was, has there been any discussion around how they fit in, again, like Lindsay said, elementary, but also when they fit in multiple categories, so your lower socioeconomic, and another area that was also identified. And then also, I've heard from parents that they seem to face a barrier into like the SHISM programs and things like that for students with disabilities. So is there any data being recognized if there's barriers there as well? And how can that best be presented or encouraged, especially around the area of belonging? Because like I know when I had the opportunity to do this programs, it was a discussion that my disability was a barrier. So identifying those things early on, especially from a pathways perspective for those looking at future education. Thank you.
Just to speak to the multiple identity, sort of multiple groups, and Andrea here from our research team can certainly speak to this better than I can probably, but what happens when we start to look at sort of the intersection of identities is our groups tend to get quite small, which means that any trends that we're seeing, there can be significant fluctuations, which makes it really hard to see whether things are improving over time. So that's why we tend to focus on sort of groups in isolation, but we certainly recognize that individuals can fit across multiple groups, but just to explain why it becomes a bit more challenging to look at intersectionality, if you want to add anything else.
And I think in terms of the barriers, I'm sorry if that was your experience.
Thank you.
That hurts my heart to hear that was your experience. One of the things that will not be a shock to anybody around the table is that the education system has functioned a certain way for a long time. And so those norms can be present, and we're doing more to make sure we identify those norms in advance. Certainly when anybody reaches out to us to explore options, we will move mountains to figure out how to make things work. But what you just shared is that we need to do more work to make sure that we're prompting that mountain moving with all of our educators in the system. So that's something that we'll make a note of.
Thank you.
And I think the other thing I just add really quickly is that a lot of what's shared today is from the district level, but the beauty of this work really does happen at the individual school site. So what we didn't get into today is that the board priority learning plan sets the standards for the district, but each school then has a school priority learning plan. And that's where you get into some of the nuances of the specifics of what is happening in the context of that school. So it's really important to also know that while today we can't share with you what every school community is experiencing or what they might be focused on, this is from the district level, but at each school, they're also setting their own targets that's looking at their own specific data to really try to drill down and meet the needs of the students specifically in each individual school. And so I think just to kind of highlight for you, this is the board level, but this happens at each school with specific targets in mind to really meet the needs of the students within each of those school locations. So.
I have a question from Catherine Holden.
Sorry. Hi, just something to talk about. When we're looking at the apprenticeship, increasing the apprentice level, sorry, I'm home because I have a new puppy, so I apologize, they're calling on me. So, so when it comes to the apprenticeships, I'm wondering if there's, I love the idea of increasing the level 1 apprenticeships. And I'm wondering if there's going to be work done from the board in terms of trying to create those partnerships with the different communities, because a lot of the times where the barrier lies is finding the actual tradespeople who are willing to take on an apprentice. And I'm wondering if there's any sort of plan for that. My other comment is I'm very keen on all of these goals, obviously, and of course all of our teacher unions or teachers that I represent are very keen on all of that. I'm just curious, I just want to really reiterate my concern that although we have all these, we get these presentations, really just a quick presentation, these sort of rapid fire presentations that we get on PD days is not enough time to really put any of these things into practice. Teachers are very keen to put these into practice and to improve our skill within the classroom and move our students forward, but really that requires time and it requires training where we can actually work with the material and collaborate as teams. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing those pieces. A couple of points, and all of these pieces I'll be bringing back to members of our team as well. We have a meeting tomorrow actually, so I'll be sharing a lot of this with them, so I really appreciate it. Certainly, we have prioritized increasing the number of apprenticeship partnerships we have over the last couple of years, and we have seen a significant increase. What we've also been working on is creating a central database for teachers and schools to be able to access, so that it's not just left to the teachers to make those partnerships, but also that they can find ones that we've already created centrally. And that has been a significant priority of our team, but we can certainly re-communicate that with the system. I really appreciated your comment about, you get a lot of information at PD Day and then the time. I totally agree with that. One of the philosophical approaches we take within program services from a learning perspective is walking with. So not just providing the pamphlet or providing a memo, although I do write a lot of those, but making sure that we're walking with others to ensure that we're building understanding together and identifying best practices to implement those pieces. We do have some instructional coaches centrally that will go out to schools and have those conversations, but I would suggest that that's a work in progress as we continue that level of communication. But if you are finding at your school or you're hearing from other teachers that are saying, I wish I could have more time or a conversation about that, have them reach out to us in program services because we can connect them. One of the coaches would go out in a second to work with staff to help figure out what would be the next step to move that forward in that school. So thank you for that.
We have a question from Melcher Walensky.
Hello, everyone. So I know that, tracking EQAO's progress is a ministry mandate, so I won't get into any of the issues I have with EQAO, but I do want to focus on the reading because, in simplified form, reading is two things. It's decoding and it's comprehension. And the way that EQAO is now with it being, digital, students can hear the stories or the text online, right? So they don't actually have to decode when they're doing EQAO. But yet throughout the year, there's a lot of time spent on, early reading screeners and diagnostics and whatnot, which of course is important for the decoding aspect. And so knowing, like I'm a former grade 3 teacher, former learning resource teacher, I know that kids can be strong in one and not the other. So I've had kids that can decode anything you put in front of them and not understand it. And I've had kids that couldn't read much, but like as in EQAO, if it's read to them, they can understand very well. So my question really is just, are you tracking that other aspect as well? Even though I know it's not ministry mandated, but are you tracking, you know, the progress that's made with all of the interventions, those early literacy interventions? And then I have one other question. Aside from that, I wanted to just get more clarity on where you said in the next steps, building educator capacity and expanding learning cycles. If you could just clarify what that means. Thank you.
Sorry, I just have to write it down because along with my eyes, my memory is going really fast too. So if I don't write it down, it didn't happen. So there's a couple of pieces there, and actually when I finished speaking, Kat was able to pull out some data on for the previous question as well that we can share with everybody. So yes, we are tracking student literacy development, especially at the primary level. So this is a ministry mandate, and it's a really positive piece. We have to engage with early reading screeners for students in year 2 kindergarten, grade 1 and grade 2. Every student in those grades has to be screened in September. Students who did not meet benchmark in September have to be rescreened in February so that we're monitoring their progress along the way. The tool we use for that is called Acadience. I'm sharing that with you because that word's going to fly out of my mouth a number of times and you're not going to know what I'm talking about. But Acadience is an online tool that educators can use that in under a minute can regularly progress monitor students in the areas that you were speaking of to identify where are they and are they improving. And it tracks that progress over time. We have reading intervention teachers, so we've provided professional development for all of our classroom teachers on this as well, but we have some reading intervention teachers that go into schools and work directly with students, those students with the largest achievement gap at that level. And what we have noted is that when that progress monitoring tool is being used on a regular basis, the students' literacy rates increase exponentially. It is quite shocking to see how quickly their abilities and their skill in that area really do improve. And that aligns with our student learning cycle as well, because that tool lets the educator know how much better the student is in a given skill, and then what needs to be done next to move that forward. So it's providing the educator with that information. And so when they use that tool, it is extremely powerful. There are others out there, but I will say that Acadience is probably the easiest to use because you can regularly assess a student in 30 seconds to a minute. And with that actually, I'll segue into the learning cycles. We encourage the use of that tool within our learning cycles as well. Because our instructional coaches now go into schools on 4 to 6 week cycles, more often 6 than 4, but depends on holidays. That can mess things up for us a little bit. In doing so, they use the various screeners and diagnostic tools that are board approved with the classroom educator, so it's a co-experience. They assess the students, identify the student learning need, engage in some co-planning of learning strategies with the students. And then, so they assess at week 1, they will reassess at minimum at week 3, and then reassess again at week 5. Week 3's assessment is used to determine, are the strategies working and do we stick with them, or do we need to make some adjustments? And week 5 or 6 further confirms the progress that has been made. And what we have discovered through that, and when we have a coach going into a school, we can capture the data more easily. We have discovered that when they follow that 6-week cycle where it's a very targeted focus on a given learning need, and it's being monitored throughout, that the student growth is quite exponential when it's moving forward. Did you want to speak to?
I was just gonna say, when we've identified marker students in each of those classes, and usually the 80 to 90% of the students that are being supported through the instructional coaches in those classrooms are demonstrating improvement, so.
And what I can say that's really, it's been a game changer. The tools that we have now that did not exist 10 years ago, that are easier to use with the students, faster. They're based in research, so the most current research in where students should be in terms of their learning ability. And it gives real-time feedback to the educator on where the student's strengths are and what area needs to be focused on. So they get that information in real time and can adjust their instruction accordingly, and we're noticing that as a significant game changer. They're able to adjust their instruction far faster than was possible, say, 10 years ago.
Just to go back to the previous way up question, I knew that our team had done some tracking of the growth in that area, so I just quickly wanted to find it and share it. So we've seen more than a 50% or close to a 50% increase in our students connected and enrolled in the OYAP program since last year. And in terms of the number of registered apprenticeships that we have, we've seen almost it says 103% increase. So we are projected to have about 140 by the end of the school year. In December, we had about 55. So significant growth just within this year. That team is doing a lot of work to increase the opportunities for students in that program, and students are enrolling, they're participating in that. So that's a lot of growth in that area for us.
Any further? Well, yeah, Jessica.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. I left my glasses in the car, so I was able to see some of what was up there. I don't know if it's possible, if that's a package that's able to be shared, so I could look at it with my better eyeballs later, because there's a lot on there to follow. So lovely to see, the school climate data being so valued and some of those perspectives from the centers. That's so wonderful to see for our kids in particular, right, who often don't feel quite as strong a sense of belonging in their school context. One of the topics that's of concern to the association that I represent are the suspensions and the informal exclusions. I saw discretionary suspensions up there as something that trying to get those rates down, and there was mention of by group or looking at disaggregating that in some way. So I just wondered if you could, I didn't see sort of I know there's like 1,000 actions that are not fitting on that table, but I just wondered if there was anything you could point to in terms of what was being put in place to try to shift that number.
I would defer to my friend.
Passing to a friend.
Thanks. So I'm Brett Reynolds, Associate Director. I have responsibility for Safe Schools, kind of doing the introductions for the next piece. Please don't want who gets fitting past to us. And this is Assistant Principal Andrew Perron, who's responsible for safe and caring schools. The conversation around how to reduce discretionary suspensions has been ongoing over decades, if not longer. And in some cases, some years we see good progress, some years we don't. And it doesn't necessarily mean that people aren't doing what they can, just different years see different behavior. So we do see some fluctuation, but over time the trend has been a very steady decrease in the number of discretionary suspensions. Restorative practices have been mentioned, and that is a key initiative that the department's undertaking to try to explore alternate ways of improving and repairing relationships in the hope that possibly avoids further issues arising that may result in a suspension. I'll ask Andrew if he's got anything else he wants to share around some of the work we're doing.
I think it just emphasizes, especially with restorative practices, like we have pilot sites we're working with this year where there's more intense training. And among those sites, 80% of those sites have seen decreases in their discretionary suspensions this year. So it's a significant investment, but we're seeing the results. So we're quite pleased about that. We work a lot with our administrators. In fact, we had a session today at Principal Operations where we were really focused again on, suspension as a tool, but not the tool to address behavior or circumstances of unsafety, and making sure that when we're pulling that tool out of the bag, it's because that's what we need, and it's gonna make a positive difference. It has to lead to learning, growth, and change in behavior. If it's not the right tool. So that's part of what we're talking about with schools as well, is making sure that we never default to suspension as a default response to, whatever stimulus it is we're working through with youth and families. We know that there's times where for various reasons it's going to make a difference. That's where we want to see it being used. We don't want to see it being used just because, right? Or because, this always leads to this. That's not how this works. These situations are highly contextual. They're highly individual to the youth involved. And that's the work we're doing with principals and vice principals across the system to help them understand. There's no chart for this. It's about knowing your families deeply. It's about really getting at functions of behavior, and it's about understanding what's going to make a difference. So that's a lot of the professional learning we're working on in the system right now.
That's great to hear. Our groups are so represented in this data. So any ways that, that can be shifted, or the understanding of the needs of the kids and whatever supports can be brought to bear is hopefully a fruitful path for our kiddos and teachers. Thank you for that.
Any more questions? Yes,
comment about just having the deck available to us. That was a lot. I'd like to be able to digest it and maybe give some comments and feedback, just by email or something like that afterwards. Because there was a lot there and yeah, I don't really feel like I had enough time to digest it. I'm wondering though, if the support and the targets that are mentioned in the presentation, if they are different or differ for special education or students in special education. So neurodiverse students in particular, autistic students in particular, since I represent Autism Ontario. I'm just wondering if any of the targets or actions that are mentioned in there differ for those types of students, or if they kind of cover that off, if the actions kind of cover the different needs that those students have. So just if you can elaborate a little bit on that.
So this year, absolutely, and I appreciate the question. So this year, we did not establish board level targets for students with special education needs directly because we did not have, they were not our largest achievement gap. So at the board level, because it is so high, we're looking at those large pieces. However, that doesn't mean we don't monitor it as we're watching through the year. Because if we were to, in our monitoring, and one of the pieces that we continue to do a better job of is not rely just on yearly data, but as much data as we are able to process throughout the year to monitor. If we see a dip, we're going to intervene in that area. But I'm going to go back to a comment that Kate made earlier about the school priority learning plan. So the board priority learning plan sets our district-wide goals, but each school selects their own goal and the group of students that they are supporting. And special education students are a group of students that they can select in the school. So a given school may find that their greatest achievement gap includes special education students, in which case they would identify those students, they would set a target for those students, and then their plan and their monitoring is for marker students within that group of students as well. So we don't have one this year, we did last year, we might next year, for special education students specifically at the board level, but we do facilitate the opportunity, and it is engaged at the school level through the school priority learning plan.
Right, thank you.
Not sent any more critical questions. I'll move on. Thanking Superintendent Laverne.
Thank you.
I now call upon General Manager Rahim from Research, Evaluation and Analytics Department and System Principal Parent, the System Principal Safe and Caring Schools, to provide a presentation on exclusion data, pause for safety. The presentation will be about 15 minutes, with 30 minutes allotted for questions and discussion following the presentation.
Thank you. Moment of truth while I see how big the font on my slide looks. Okay, thanks for having us. If you want to just go ahead to the next slide now. Oh yeah, it'll be bigger. So we will share these slides as well. So you
Take
can
a snapshot of everything,
every
every screen. Thank you.
So today we're going to start with a little bit of a recap around exclusions, and then we're going to get a little bit into the data and then open up the time for discussion. As Anthony mentioned, my name is Andrea Rahim, and I am the General Manager of Research, Evaluation, and Analytics. So I spend a lot of my time sitting in district-wide data, and the thing that I love about coming to chat with this group is to hear your reflections, questions, stories that really help us make sense of the data. So I always love these conversations, so thank you for making the time for us on the agenda tonight. So starting with the reflection on exclusions as a pause for safety. So it is a non-disciplinary pause to secure safety and plan a timely return to school. So that non-disciplinary distinction is critical. It is not an alternative to suspensions when students are being removed from school. So exclusions are used when progressive discipline is deemed inappropriate after reviewing all of the mitigative factors, and it is only used when all other strategies and supports have been considered. An exclusion is required when a student poses a significant physical and or mental safety risk to themselves and or others. So when we look at the data for the 24 to 25 school year, we've got some highlights on the next slide. We had a total of 404 exclusions for the academic year last year, and this reflects
where we had to close classes because we weren't able to replace staff. So in that situation, there could be students, identified with ASD who are as a result, but that's usually where we have multiple absences due to unforeseen circumstances such as illness, as we would any class. I think I can say it's not the district's practice to send students home when we have a shortage of resources. I can say that we have.
All of us, all of us.
Sorry, we won't say anything, sorry. You can't comment, yeah, sorry.
There was another part coming. But I can say there are circumstances where we don't know what the right resources or interventions are yet, and that is where an exclusion might come into practice, because there's been an incident where we reasonably foresee someone could experience harm, and we need to identify the cause, and we need to identify what the right plan is. Part of that plan might be an investment in more resources, but it's not in anticipation of not having the right resources that we would have someone at home. But LSS may want to, Kate might want to comment further.
Yeah, I think this goes to the realities of needing to provide that individualized, meaningful support. And certainly we hear it as well, that families are experiencing having to have their children at home. As Associate Director Reynolds said, the reality is that we're always working to have students be participating in school in a meaningful way. Sometimes that takes time to come up with a plan, sometimes that requires us to look at human resources, but also the other resources that are available. Sometimes it's about looking at the environment that the student's experiencing. Sometimes it's about looking at how we can be supporting within a system and structure and a shared support model. And so I think at each and every one of the stories that we hear and that we try to work through, we do approach from that individualized approach, recognizing that sometimes it takes us time to figure it out, and sometimes it requires us to look differently at what is available within the school and the school system. In terms of your question about is it tracked and where is the data, I think as you heard today, we're in the process of getting more accurate data, and that is preliminarily being reflected here tonight. Certainly we're having ongoing conversations with Reed, but also with our admissions department about what that looks like and how we're tracking to make sure that we do have the accurate data and we do understand the number of students that are in that situation. I think the other thing to note that was highlighted is that we are looking at the procedures and the guidelines that are in place and how we can be helping to direct principals in such a way to ensure that those plans for safe return are being implemented in a timely manner with the supports available. Many people have experienced a variety of people in this room trying to sort through and work through having students be in school safely. And we certainly recognize that some people may feel that is not the case for their family or their child. However, we are constantly in the collaborative stance to try to move things forward and ensure that we do have that individualized approach for each student.
Just to add, I think it's important to note and just reflect on the data that we do have, albeit completely understand that may not capture absolutely everything. I don't think we are capturing absolutely everything. However, going back to the data, when an exclusion occurs or a pause for safety happens, typically short in nature. And I think what Kate alluded to as well is when you have the conditions set up or the conditions to return that are really intentional in planning for the student's success and for maybe it's resources, maybe it's a review of the safety plan, maybe it's consultation with some of us here at this table or a BA, for example, or a social emotional learning teacher. Those intentional conditions that we use, I think are there for a reason, but also supports the data to suggest that these are short in nature and are not often repeats. Yeah, typically once.
I have a just a quick follow-up to that. So we were talking about restorative practices in the last presentation, and so I think it kind of ties in here quite nicely. So I'm just wondering if any of the restorative practices or the training that, kind of meld together with the last and this presentation, if any of those are focused on proactive strategies or pause for safety are concerned, and if you could elaborate on that.
I can start.
I'm looking at Kate, I'm looking
Yeah.
at you.
I think, proactive work in terms of building conditions for learning and conditions for safety is absolutely part of the core work. So restorative practices is part of it. I wouldn't say that that's, core to the work, creating safe conditions in schools. But it's absolutely one plank in that platform that we're building. But all the work we do sort of as system resources supporting schools is focused on what conditions are we creating writ large in schools so that students can engage safely and be in school. And, as Justin and others have mentioned, when we get to the situations that are sort of, so intense that we need to employ a clause for safety, we know that the data suggests that the majority are short and don't need to be repeated. I know that doesn't feel any better for the families who are experiencing, longer pauses or multiples. But that work involves many, many people trying to make sure that we're creating those right conditions. And it's not just about planning and programming for the youth, although that's part of it. We also regularly do classroom safety audits. We talk about what resources are in the room in terms of the physical space. We talk about, how are we communicating with the youth in the class? How are we making sure that they're welcomed back after a class? All those things are part of the conversation to make sure that we're building for success. And the fact that that happens in the majority of the cases isn't good enough. We're still trying to figure out how do we make sure that's happening for every student because they deserve to be in school.
Are all of those things that you just mentioned sound great? Are all of those things sort of like typically in an ideal situation, communicated or like, are we sitting down with the families and the team and the parents to really understand the process or what we're trying to achieve with all of those things that you just explained?
Part of it is like, we hope so, and we plan for it in certain ways. Most of the communication is handled by the school-based team. But in almost every exclusion or cause for safety, there is a wide array of folks involved, depending on the need and the behavior we're trying to get at, that are involved in making that plan and working with the principal to prepare, and for the principal to then communicate with the family. So every exclusion, the superintendent of education is involved. So it's something that the principal needs to be communicating with the superintendent. I am often, but not always, involved as well in thinking through what else could we do? Is this really what we need? Is there an alternative? And if we do have to go through it, what are we going to do? What's the work we're taking on to make sure that they can come back and be safe? So all of those things don't involve, 7 or 8 of us communicating with the family. It does rest mostly on the school-based administration team. Sure. But we are almost, in almost every case I can think of, many of us were involved at least at some point in making sure we could get this right or as right as possible.
With that in mind, is there a procedure or protocol that's written standard of how we do things? Because, okay, so, and that's what I was wondering about, because the engagement from the school-based administration team, each school can have their own ways of dealing with things, there's nuances of it, but unless there's this procedure to follow, then there's gonna be wide nuances between different schools. So if we do have that procedure,
yes, and that's also part of why the superintendent needs to be engaged.
Okay.
So schools can't on their own decide without consultation that this is what we're doing and the procedure we're gonna invoke in this situation. It's always consultative at the front end because we're having those conversations with them to make sure that they are following the procedure, that we're staying as close as we can to, as tight a timeline as we can to get the youth back in school. But we really need to make sure we're getting back in school safe, like that's the focus throughout. But all of us that are engaged through the procedure, so the superintendent, learning support services, safe schools, like the multi-D team for that school is usually involved, so that's psych and social work depending on the need. We have social emotional learning teachers involved. We have lots of folks, but in terms of the key markers of like what do we have to do if we're considering exclusion, that is set across all schools.
Okay, gotcha. With that happening, there's a feedback loop of, we had success, we didn't have success, here's areas of improvement.
That's right.
When we gain those areas of improvement, where does that go and how is it, disseminated over across the board so that other school systems, or when I say school systems, other schools specifically, are all operating with lessons learned?
So part of it is because of where the central folks are involved, since we're up in so many situations, we carry a lot of that knowledge. Knowledge for an individual student that follows them between schools is often contained in things like a safety plan, right, which is a formal document that details, what do we know about them, what works really well, what are we trying to make sure of. So there's formal documentation with each student, but there's also corporate knowledge across learning support services. I know that, for instance, I mentioned our multi-D teams are involved, so psychology and social work are often involved with supporting causes for safety, and depending on circumstances. But I know they meet as whole teams across the board too, to share what they're noticing, what's working well, what other things do we have to be thinking about. So there's a lot of collaboration within these sort of clinical groups, right, that's carrying some of this forward, as well as when we work with principals. Like I work with principals, again, not on every pause for safety, but on many. I'm thinking about, when we try this over here, what worked, what didn't, what else might we bring to bear to support this youth and family. So part of that is the fact that we have central resources engaged. Part of that is how we share that knowledge as well.
Gotcha. And last question, sorry, you're very patient, this is the last that I promise. And this is great, so within the organization itself, there is the procedures, there's the feedback loops, there's lessons learned. What about from the student's perspective at home? Is there a feedback loop from parents to guide, well, not so much to guide, but to provide input of, yes, things work outside of the four walls of the school, so that can be brought into the, I guess, the lessons as well.
Almost every pause for safety, again, I can't say every single one, almost everyone involves a case conference with the family to seek that input. And if they're being supported by professionals outside in the community, another very common thing we would work through is getting exchange and release to make sure that we're talking directly to other professionals supported in the community to talk strategies, what's working, what are you noticing, what are you suggesting, to make sure we're incorporating that.
Thanks, Ian, for the great questions. Just a reminder, there's a speakers list, so please raise your hands and I'll put you on the list in order of the speakers raising the questions. Just because Lindsay had her hand up first, and so Lindsay, you're next.
It's okay, Ian said he was third. So hearing from you about school-based team handling communication, family handling, making a plan. However, I think I have to concur with Sonia that there's certainly a perception that exclusions are used by schools that are struggling with that aspect. So how can you support a school that does appear to be struggling? I mean, I guess how would you know? And B, what can be done rapidly in situations like that, given the fact that if the way the school is coping is exclusion upon exclusion for a student that's struggling, time is of the essence. What do you got?
Do you want to start?
Well, sure. One of the reasons why principals have to get the approval of their superintendent instruction is just so that there's someone monitoring that and can track those patterns, and that is one of the key functions of the superintendent. In addition, they're also able to engage different set of departments to try to get the resources to support the ideas that they need. But it doesn't say that, that's not to say that those situations still do occur despite those best intentions. Maybe if you want to.
We're also working on making sure superintendents have more accurate, more timely data about what exclusions are happening in their schools. So one thing that we've implemented this year with our principal investigation process. Now it's a disciplinary process, but superintendents now get a list. I'm not sure if it's a daily or a weekly basis of every active principal's investigation in their schools. We're looking at trying to get something similar for all active exclusions in their schools to make sure that they can stay on top of things. Things don't, sort of happen without them being fully aware, and where they're seeing those patterns, especially in specific schools that may be struggling and need support, that they can make sure that they're actioning that from their level. So we know that year in review data is not useful for these families in the moment when they're working through it. So we have a keen focus this year on getting more timely data, both to schools and to superintendents and to LSS as a department, safe schools as a department, to make sure that we can intervene sooner where there is a need for support.
I'd also add that we do have other mechanisms for, emerging issues that happen in schools. And so we do have a process where through principals in collaboration with their superintendents can be looking at accessing some extra funds to support a student through a return to school after a pause for safety as an emergency EA support. That's one example of like a right in the moment resource that's available, but also specifically through typically the principals of learning support services. Principals are in contact with us when they find themselves in these situations and they feel as though they're not quite sure what to do next. And that's the intention, that it's a collaborative process where you can have that ongoing conversation have you thought about? Do you have data to support? Are there trends that you're looking at? Can the social emotional learning teacher come to help build a plan for the student in the school? Can the itinerant teacher for autism come and help ensure that we have good programming in place for the students so that their learning needs are being met? Are there, so the list kind of goes on. Can the occupational therapist get involved to help understand the sensory profile? We have a lot of resources available to us. We don't have one for every school, obviously. Those are precious resources, as you can imagine, but certainly it is through the collaboration with Learning Support Services that we begin to wrap around and try to provide that fulsome support so that we can better understand, to Andrew's point earlier, what some of those, the functions of those behaviors are, so that we can help to address what is causing them, and we can help to hopefully draw them down and have the student be at school safely.
I have a question from Lorianne Bradley first.
Thank you. I had a question about the statistics at the beginning of the presentation. About 70% are 1 to 4 days. I was wondering about the other 30%, and I wanted to understand what the scope in terms of number of days was. So it sounds like a lot of them, 1 to 4 seems like a large grouping, or unless the scope of that is much longer, so that length of time. I'm wondering if you could expand on that and help me understand that.
So I can start. When we look at the sort of the distribution, 1 to 4 is certainly the most common. And again, we would like that to be as short as possible, because sometimes it does take time to get the right people involved to make sure the plan is going to support safety. In terms of what the span is, when we look at sort of from 5 to 11 days, there is some portion, I don't know, it's 20% or so in there. It is only, we only have 7 exclusions in our system based on our data that were more than 21 days. So it is very, very rare that it continues long term. That's not the same as impossible, and again, for those 7 families, that's significant, right, where they're not in school. But the process, most of the time, does let us get to having students back in school, and usually, again, more than half it sticks, right? Because that's our goal, is have them back and stay back, not to be bouncing in and out. So in terms of the very, very long ones, there are very, very few across our 76,000 students. We're talking about 7, again, very significant for those 7 families. But we aren't talking about massive numbers that are, of the remaining 30% that are extremely long.
What is the question of Allison?
Oh, sorry, I just want to add a follow-up. So, if that's okay, Anthony. Okay, so in those cases where the exclusions are longer, would you say that they're characterized more than by, the school saying that student can't return until certain conditions are met, or until certain resources can be put in place, some safety planning, that kind of thing? Or is that oftentimes some kind of an agreement or something that you're working out with the parents or caregivers around that, where there's maybe a mutual agreement where that student might like the parent is saying, okay, no, maybe they do need more of a timeout, or those kinds of discretionary pieces. I'm just wondering just what that can look like.
I don't want to be really careful speculating. Those situations are all, again, highly contextual and individual in each circumstance. Sometimes it is a matter of, it takes time. I know that I've been involved in supporting exclusions where it just happens that the family goes on vacation, while we're working through this, which is great. I hope they enjoy themselves, but it does end up a little bit longer then, because the conversations, the meetings, the work for implementation still needs to happen. So these circumstances are all unique. I would say that while we observe trends, we try to work at trends, I would be remiss if I suggested that, what necessarily happened in one that made it take longer was true in any other one. So I would want to be careful about that. It is, I would say, not often that if what we really need is a review of the safety plan and some intervention from central staff to support a plan for safety, those typically are ones that are resolved quickly. There is usually some factor which would make it longer that would be out of the ordinary.
question from Allison.
Well, Lorianne, I think you kind of read my mind. So I'm a community representative, but I'm a consulting general pediatrician in my job, and I see kids every day. And I was wondering about the 30% that are longer or have repeat pauses for safety. And certainly I have some children in my practice that have experienced that, families that have gone through that. And I think we can learn a lot from those cases, and absolutely there's probably so many factors, but yeah, trying to get an understanding of what leads to success. So what shortens the duration for some of those longer exclusions, what protective factors or things get put in place that allows a child to return and stay back. And I think just some feedback from my clinical experience is often it comes down to, I think the family's sense of communication from the school, because my sense is there's a lot that's happening behind the scenes with central staff, conversations, trying to mobilize resources or assessments. And I know that probably when those wheels are turning, it might not be appropriate to update families every little step of the way, especially when things haven't been kind of tied together. But what I often hear from families is a real sense of floundering when there's a pause for safety. They have no sense of timing, so they haven't been told this will likely be 1 day, we're aiming for 3 days, we're aiming for 7 days, this is our target, and they don't seem to be in the loop about where the board is at in terms of those steps and supports. And so I think that, so much of what we all see comes down to communication and that transparency. And I think when we can kind of say, this is where we're at, and I don't know what is in the policy in terms of like, what's the frequency that we are reaching out to families? Is it a daily, we have this coming up, we're gonna let you know tomorrow or the next day, or is that school specific? I'm not sure. But I think that unknown is really difficult for families to manage. Like parents are off work, the kid is home. And so I just wanted to kind of share that. I think that's been very difficult. And I would also say, like, in terms of community partners, of which I am one, I give my card all the time to parents to say, like, the school can call me, we can have a quick phone chat. I recently invited myself to like an IPRC, and the school was like, this is so strange, your pediatrician's never attended the IPRC. And I just say, like, I'm offering all the time to connect by phone because, often these kids I've known for like years and years and years. I can say where we've been, where we started, where we're going, who's involved, what we've tried. And I just think that, often we don't get that connection. And so, I think that could be definitely helpful in a pause for safety. I would hope that most of those children have a community physician, whether it's a family physician, whether it's a pediatrician, whether it's a psychiatrist, whether it's a psychotherapist, and that, you actually reach out to those community people, because my experience certainly has been that that's not happening, despite me kind of saying, hey, I'm happy to, yes, you have to sign consent to disclose information, but I think that's the other piece that maybe could actually help get these kids back, because sometimes it's like, I don't know that this has happened, right, until the kid comes to see me for a scheduled visit, and, or the family has finally reached out and said, things are really not going well, we've been out of school for 3 weeks, and we don't know when we're going back. And maybe if I would have actually been aware of the situation sooner, like I could work with the school boards to actually help things move along. So just a bit of my perspective. But Lori, I'm happy that you asked that question, because that's what I was thinking too.
Thanks, Allison. And I think in an ideal world, this is always happening. And so we have scenarios where this happens exactly as it's supposed to, and we have scenarios where it doesn't. Certainly one of our first steps is who from the multidisciplinary team is engaged, and if no one is engaged, okay, who is best to get engaged, but then who is connected in community. And so if the family is unable to engage community for whatever reason, how can we support that? Because at the end of the day, we all know a wraparound approach for a student who's experiencing difficulty at school is going to be better for the student and for their family, that they feel supported and that they know we're all. And so that is always our goal, and for all of the people around the table know that that's the intention of the multidisciplinary team getting involved, and that is the intention of the school to wrap around. And so I think we know that we can be doing better. I don't want to suggest that there's not room for improvement, but what I want to suggest is that the model is such that really that is our whole goal, is that we are able to wrap around a student and provide the care, not only what the school system can provide for care, but how community can support us in that care as well. That's always our intention.
Dean first, did you have something?
No, my question was answered.
Okay, Simon?
Just wanted to reiterate, I think the conversation has been really good actually about understanding the process and the suggestions brought by the other reps at the table, which I think is great. I just really wanted to reiterate that it would be beneficial to look at the situations in the schools where students, particularly from the autistic community, are being excluded and sent home when there are not enough supports in the schools. It's happening, and I think if we're doing data and we're looking at it, we need to really dive in and find out where it's happening, look for patterns, look for solutions, whatever that may be. We're always happy to partner with ideas of brainstorming or anything like that, or give information that we're getting from families, that kind of thing. But I think it's really important to look at not just the pause for safeties where there's behavioral challenges, but also where there are not supports and students are being excluded. So that's just a comment.
Certainly, if you don't mind, like if you become aware of a situation where there hasn't been anything that jeopardizes safety and the student's been excluded, like let me or the SOE know, because that's not, we need to know, please, thank you.
The only thing I'd add too is that our changes in how we track these, part of what we're really hoping we can get at is first of all accurate data, right? It doesn't rely on a separate process for us to track this. The other part is that even when there's partial day attendance, we're working with schools to make sure that coding is now done properly with the pause for safety coding, so we'll be able to collect and track that going forward. So the data we're talking about tonight was sort of corrected in arrears for last year, so we know that that's better, but not all the way there yet.
Yeah.
This year's data, once we have it for next year from the SEAC, we think will be much more accurate. We'll be able to get at some of those situations that right now may be flying under the radar.
Thank you.
So glad to hear about the data improvements and seeing the attendance data. I think that's great because we can't have these conversations fully unless we really know. These numbers have been really helpful. Even seeing the length of time and the variation that's there has been great. So kudos to you folks for putting that process in place to get some better data. I wondered about the ways in which the more informal exclusions might be captured. So for example, many of our families, might be a phone call home at 12 o'clock saying things are not going well today. We think it'd be better if they went home, or they're really dysregulated, come and pick them up. I wonder how and if that would sit in the attendance data, if it would be flagged in some way that would make it clear that it was related to kind of something happening in the moment versus like a planned absence. I just wonder if that is kind of captured anywhere as a regular practice.
I know this is something that Kate and I have been talking about in terms of what we're going to do, what's going to work well for that.
Okay.
We are worried about a data gap there right now.
Yeah.
So we think that the moves we've made, as I've described, are going to help us work in that direction. But we have some more to do, and a lot of it is also just continuing to work with the professional learning for our principals, from making sure that these things are entered properly. There's a big difference between a parent who shows up at school to take their child home because that's the choice they've made, right, or the plan they've come up with, as opposed to something's really gone wrong today. So we're continuing to look at exactly what we're going to instruct schools around that, but we now have some processes in place and some data collection methods in place that should help with that, but it is a work in progress.
I appreciate your honesty on that. Thank you very much.
Let's just to finish off, we're tight on time, but and to tie it together, and there's people who are on the outside edge, peripheral of the table, who raise concerns about this. Is that even with those one-off situations, and not it's just exclusion, but situations where capturing that, because we never know if that one-off situation becomes more than once. And so how do we capture this and maybe log it out as this one-off, but if it becomes more than one-off, and then having those logged, it becomes more than one and so forth, 3 or whatever, and be able to, because if it's on unprotected grounds or special needs and that person needs attention, well, they get the attention they need on a timely basis and so forth. Because if it's not logged, then they don't get that attention that they need. And the question there, and it falls under the radar because maybe that very first instance was important, very important instance, and so forth. And so, yeah.
I think that speaks to what Allison brought up as well, and so I think that there are opportunities. What you were suggesting is looking at the multiple ones and what can we learn from that in terms of ensuring that we are meeting, going beyond focusing on the 70% that's one time and thinking about the 30%, I think is what Allison was getting at as well.
All right. Moving on to item 7, matters for discussion. The item 7.1, the forward agenda has been provided. Are there any additions or changes? So, anyone? I have one in particular. There's been a community at large. There has been a lot of discussion about putting together 2 motions in the area of special education access, and it's related to this this topic we were just discussing, and clarification for placement processes, and putting together these two different motions. And there's been help from Catherine and also Trustee Lyra Evans in putting together these 2 motions, and I've been helping draft it also. And we'd like to put it together for discussion at the next event, the next meeting for further discussion and possible for passing the motion, or at least for further discussion.
Will you provide the motions, or you would
Yes.
like to add the motion to the matter for discussion for the June agenda?
Yes.
Okay, can you provide the motion
Yeah.
to us so that we can include it?
Yes.
Great.
Not me, Catherine, a different Catherine.
Not you, Catherine, not to worry.
Okay, moving to item 7.2. This has been deferred to June, which when the chair returns. And then moving to item 7.3, this has been deferred to June when the chair returns. Moving on to item 8, departmental update.
Thank you very much. So I, this evening, have a few quick updates. First, obviously, we had quite a few members here who have stepped away now, but just wanted to thank the team from Safe Schools as well as the team from Program Services for being here to provide some information this evening. If there are follow-up questions or items that you want to bring forward, please know that always we welcome your feedback and appreciate the discussion this evening. I'd like to highlight that this week is Mental Health Week, so from May 4th to May 10th, the OCDSB is recognizing Mental Health Week. This year's theme is Come Together Canada, and it's an invitation to spark small and everyday moments of connection and to recognize the role we all play in supporting mental health. Our mental health staff have designed a series of simple conversation starters and prompts for you and your family to check out and discover ways of supporting mental health at home. Those are available on our website. In addition, they've also created resources around morning announcements and simple activities and ways to uplift student voice throughout the week in our schools. So throughout the week, ask your children and students if they've had anything exciting happening in their schools that they may want to share with you. Daily themes include awareness, reflection, connection, growth, and celebration. Feel free to check out the website for how to have conversations with your own children about these topics. In addition to this being Mental Health Week, next week, as a part of Mental Health Week, we are hosting a speaker series, Keeping the Light On, Recharging Your Battery for the Moments That Matter. That's next Wednesday, May 13th from 7 to 8:30 p.m. We're excited to invite Alyssa Ngozi, the award-winning inspirational speaker and best-selling author of The Oxygen Mask Mindset. She's a trusted media expert with over 20 years experience in mental health, education, and healthcare. She blends the powerful storytelling with real-world experience to deliver a practical, evidence-informed framework. She'll be talking about reclaiming your energy and managing burnout, protecting your mental health and sustaining hope, and showing up fully for your family without sacrificing yourself in the process. So again, this is next Wednesday evening from 7 to 8:30. Is the recording going to be made available? And the recording will be made available after if you can't join on the evening. In addition, I'd like to highlight on the School Mental Health Ontario website, there's the By Your Side webinar series. Tomorrow night is one about conversations about body image. Actually, I think it's tomorrow afternoon. And on June 5th, there's a conversation about anxiety. If you register for these on the School Mental Health website, you will get a link to a recording as well. But also, all of the webinar series through the By Your Side website are available to watch online at School Mental Health Ontario. Some other ones include addiction, supporting your students through substance use addiction, as well as digital tech use. The other thing I wanted to highlight for you this evening is some of the professional development opportunities that are going on to support students with mental health as well as students with special education needs across the district. On April 27th, there was the Union Professional Activity Day, and so that's when each union group goes with their partner, with their members, and highlights certain things. So across all of the union groups, special education and mental health was highlighted profoundly, and so we're grateful for that. There were topics that focused on universal design for learning, strategies for co-regulation and inclusion, supporting students with FASD, sensory-aware spaces, trauma-informed approaches. That's just to name a few. And so we're really grateful to our union partners who pulled together fantastic union professional development days that really do help to highlight some of the key areas of focus that we too believe are important for all of our educators and PSSB and EA staff. Another piece of important information you might find interesting, our learning support teachers come together 3 times a year for networks, and so we have the last one coming up here at the end of spring. This is when learning support teachers, who are, of course, our special education leaders across the district, come together, and this is an opportunity for us to give them information, to have collaborative conversations about what's going well and what areas of support are needed, and to create that consistency and alignment across the district. And so just wanted to highlight that as a practice that we are undergoing next week, I think, is when they all are. And another thing to highlight for you this evening around professional development is about transition support. Clearly, it's we're in May. May and June become that time of year where we start to turn our minds to September, believe it or not. And so a lot of school teams are focusing on that transition. There are some key transition points for sure that we highlight, and so we do have some central staff running some professional development for staff around the grade 8 to grade 9 transition. But also we have a lot of central teams working really closely with some of our community partners right now. Specifically, I'll highlight the Entry to School program, which is an Ontario autism program that we partner with, and those are pre-school age students. First, where they go to a half-day program to gain those preschool skills, and then are able to transition to our school with support. So we have a fantastic transition support program that we do offer from that program into our schools. So those are some of the key transition pieces that are happening. As always, transitions are a highlighted piece in every individual education plan, and so it's a really important conversation to be having at this time of year. Lastly, I'll just simply remind people that we, as part of the World Autism Awareness and Acceptance Month, we did have a speaker series Christy Welch spoke to community about understanding BIMS, that's burnout, inertia, meltdown, and shutdown. That recording is available on our website, so if you missed it, it was a fantastic opportunity. I really enjoyed the presentation and walked away feeling like I had a perspective from the autistic person's point of view that I think is really powerful for us to be thinking about as educators to ensure that we are really planning and putting forward how we can create those inclusive environments for students. So if you missed that one, it is still available on our website. And that's all for me this evening.
Is there any new business this evening? Yes,
I just really quick have some resources and information from Autism Ontario to share afterwards. Would it be best to share the whole group or with Deb or?
Do you want SEAC to have it or do you want the OCSB staff to have it?
Well, I'll share it with everybody.
Sure, if you
First,
share it with
yeah,
Deb,
yeah.
then you'll know it's kind of,
Yeah.
it'll come to, like,
Sure.
that the staff component is covered.
Sure.
If you share it with Sue, Joanna, and myself,
Yep.
then Sue can distribute it to you.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
I quickly have a brief from the audit committee as observer. There's a public consultation update for the 2026-2027 budget. And this is the one that they're engaging through SEAC, PIC, emails, school council chairs, and Engage, OCDSB Engage, up to the 15th of May. I'll just verbatim really go quickly through what they presented in summary from the meeting from just a couple weeks ago. There's 5 particular themes that came strongly across. A strong theme related to provincial funding, reduced administrative costs being important, improving classroom support, and particularly by having educational assistance, improving school facilities, more funding for school supplies and equipment, and smaller class sizes, and 5th, having a more strategic approach to technology that directly supports student learning and staff productivity. And then this is preliminary. There was 139 responses from OCSB Engaged as of April 18th that contributed to these findings. So it's fairly early. There's more to be said probably in findings later on. That's it. Please note that our last SEAC meeting for this year will be held on June 17th, 2026. Note that this is not the first Wednesday of the month. And then I now declare this meeting adjourned.
Yeah, you hear my timing.
Yes.